Greetings and welcome back to Custom Card Coverage, where we look at different custom cards from across the online Hearthstone community to judge new and creative effects. Today we'll be looking at a specific flavor of Shaman cards, which people have desired and dreaded since the class's conception: Overload Synergy cards. Shaman has had the Overload effect on some of its cards since the classic set. While Overload is interesting as a tool to push resources out faster, its drawback should be apparent. The following turn after an Overload card is played, an amount of mana is locked away. Play a card with Overload 2 on turn 3, and you'll have 2 mana on turn 4. 4 minus 2. Simple, straightforward. But as long as there has been Overload, or any mechanic for that matter, there have been other cards that get boosts from it. The classic set had Unbound Elemental, a relatively underwhelming minion made slightly above average if its effect was activated. However, the quirk of Overload synergies in particular is that Overload is often given to faster cards, while synergies are best pulled off by having a slower deck with more card draw. This is why Unbound Elemental hasn't seen much play, it's simply too slow. Other cards that unlock overloaded crystals, or get boosted from playing Overload cards, generally haven't seen play as well. The main exception is Tunnel Trog, which became infamous as an incredibly powerful aggressive piece. So when it comes to control-oriented Overload synergies, the concept has been slowly power crept upon. Compare and contrast Unbound Elemental with a new card from Boomsday, Thunderhead. Sure, Unbound has a few cases where it can be more useful, but generally speaking the sparks are just stronger. Today we'll look at cards like this, and less at cards like Tunnel Trog. Aggro upon aggro is not what I consider a fun synergy. So how can these Overload boosted effects become interesting and useful? Let's find out. This is the normal, the weird, and the game-breaking. First up, we have Zap Totem. 2 mana 0/3 Shaman Totem. After you play a card with Overload, deal 1 damage to all enemy minions. Very straightforward minion here. Shaman is certainly a fan of 0 attack totems, which they often synergize with attack buffs. So this base minion is fine provided the effect can be adequately activated. With that in mind, we want the cheapest Overload spells that we can get, cards like Zap and Lightning Bolt. This totem with 2 zaps would provide a pretty healthy board clear. That said, this card isn't exactly the strongest card we've ever seen, much like other cards that have come before it. Its power is circumstantial and best harnessed with cheap Overload spells that might be a bit of a challenge to get your hands onto. But it fits perfectly well with the strategies that decks like even Shaman employ, and it does make sure to capitalize on being a defensive card despite its Overload. Perfectly middle of the road, as we want from our normal example. Next we have Shen. 9 mana 10/10 Shaman Legendary. Battlecry, your Overload cards cost 0 next turn. Overload 10. This is so cool. The 10 Overload would normally mean that the next turn is completely negated, but the Battlecry directly counters that. But then let's say a large swing turn is done with a Volcano and 2 Earth Elementals. The following turn after that would then be the drawback turn with a large amount of Overload. The way that this card plays with mana cost and Overload crystals is just so fascinating. Here's another way of looking at it. Overload allows the player to spend future mana early. This card instead allows the mana from 2 turns in the future to be spent next turn, while eliminating other mana costs. This spending of mana in unusual ways is exactly what Overload stands for, and exactly what synergies should lean on. This is worlds more interesting than Tunnel Trog pushing to face after dropping a 4 mana 7/7. Now sure, certain other Overload synergies could strongly exploit this card's Overload 10, but if we're going to have a high Overload minion, this is the type of minion I would like to put in that position. The design space should eventually be touched upon, and this card does it in a very unique way. Finally, we have Mana Bloom. 2 mana Shaman spell, transfer your overloaded mana crystals to your opponent. And this takes that control flavor of Overload and overdoes it. It overdoes it way too much. First, unlocking Overload is something that requires care. It basically provides a greater boost the more Overload is used. Unlocking 3, 4, or more crystals can be a very powerful effect. So an Overload heavy deck would consider a card that does just the unlocking, but this does a lot more. It's easy to underestimate how powerful reducing the opponent's mana is, but consider Loatheb. That card doesn't even reduce mana, it just blocks the use of spells. That still suffices for anti-combo. Mana Bloom could be used in a similar way, or it could be used for strong tempo swings. Volcano, Feral Spirit, Mana Bloom would clear the board, summon a pair of minions, and eliminate 4 mana from the opponent, and that's not even as bad as it can get. Other cheap overload spells can cause this to swing further. And other cards with overload 5 or 10, which are rare but do exist, would be transformed into game-swinging cards, obliterating boards and paralyzing opponents for multiple turns. Elemental Destruction, Earth Elemental Mana Bloom would result in a complete board clear, and the opponent only able to play a 2-drop in response. This is an extreme example, but it goes to show how overload synergies shouldn't work. While having something that can make overload alright to use is okay, having something turn overload into an extremely positive effect is dangerous. Some of the best synergies in the game turn negative effects into positive ones, but doing that for an entire keyword is not a wise idea, simply because the extent of exploits is too grand. As with most synergies, the best way to go about messing with an effect is to ensure it still has weaknesses. If you have an idea for an overload synergy card, send me a tweet, @PennilessPlayer, that's Penniless with a Y, #overloadedcard. As always, try to find the right balance between strong synergy and keeping the overload weakness apparent. I look forward to seeing what you come up with. 3 weeks ago, I asked you to tweet me for #DragonCard, and my favorite goes to Glimmercape, who made Chromatus. 10 mana 5/5 legendary dragon, taunt, divine shield, lifesteal, poisonous, spell damage +1, death rattle, summon 5 1/1 whelps. The whelps each have 1 of taunt, divine shield, lifesteal, poisonous, and spell damage +1. Now I'll be the first to admit that this card isn't the strongest. A 10 mana card often demands powerful results, and this card is a little slow to be able to deliver said results. Additionally, this card is very weak to silence and transform effects. However, this card is interesting for 3 reasons. The first being it still has interesting effects when played on curve. The effects of Divine Shield Poisonous, Divine Shield Taunts, and the Whelps having a poisonous minion alongside a taunt minion all give way to some powerful combinations. Next, cards like Barnes can pull this card to generate very powerful results, which means that decks can be built to exploit this card's strengths while mitigating its weaknesses. And finally, this card has excellent flavor. Looking at it, it's immediately apparent what the story of this dragon is. An abomination created of a freak experiment that fused the power of the dragonflights? This is a legendary card well designed, one that tells a story of the character from the card. That aspect makes this card much more interesting and intriguing, and altogether makes the card worthy of praise. Excellent work. If you'd like to see more cards like this, be sure to head over to Twitter to check them out yourself. Remember to craft, critique, and have fun, smile on the just, and I will see you all next time.